I want to welcome you guys to Gray Area. And on this platform, it is our mission to connect house music fans just wherever in the world they might be. But this interview is all about techno, specifically the duo of Cell Injection, which is David Flores and Moe Espinosa. How are you guys doing today?
Good. Thank you.
Yeah, doing well.
Good. And for any uninitiated viewer, I think it bears mentioning that each of you on your own has had a very successful music career, and an interview would, and each of you has a career that could easily necessitate its own interview, and that would be a very interesting interview. But I was curious, with everything you each already have going on, is it hard to find time for Cell Injection on top of that?
Mo, you could take that away.
Well, I mean, outside of just our music careers, David is amongst some of the very few people in the world, that, I talk to on a daily basis other than maybe like my spouse and my son. So, we have a pretty tight friendship, with us and our crew. And I think trying to actively create space for Cell Injection doesn't really feel like a necessity so much, because it just feels kind of like a natural thing that happens when the time comes for it. So yeah, it's not something that I don't think we actively like pursue into cutting out and carving out time for, but the time comes naturally.
Well, that's the best case scenario, isn't it?
Yeah, it's fun. It feels like an extension of what we do and who we are. And I think we're always just kind of excited and appreciative that people are still interested in us collaborating and doing things together sometimes.
I see. And so with
the old school heads, it's just like, and like old school heads will know us a bit more because we were a lot more active before, so. Yeah. That's why, like, if we get a request to do Cell Injection, we're kind of like, wow, okay. It's not a very common thing these days.
And it's not very common these days, you're saying?
Not so much. We don't play together that much anymore, so it's a bit more special.
Yeah, and we try to keep it a special thing. I think it's something we enjoy doing, and when it comes up and we have the opportunity to do it, and it's presented in the right space for the right people in the right place, then yeah, it's fun. It's just fun to do.
I see. And so with these spotlights, we like to take it all the way back to the beginning, so that if somebody wanted to watch this, they could kind of get the full story, not have to find little bits and pieces of it elsewhere, So I want to do that with each of you individually. Mo, you first, because I know your music career basically extends back to when you were 13. You were already doing stuff professionally. Take me back to just your first experiences with music.
First experiences with music goes back far more than that. Naturally, I'd assume most people could relate to that. But I think I've always developed a strong admiration for the musicianship that goes into things. I recall at a young age looking back at everything from watching Miles Davis to Eddie Van Halen to any kind of like musician who was incredibly skilled at what they did and saw how they crafted their skills with their instrument. And that intrigued me, and I wanted to be good at something like that. I liked the idea of mastering something. And that carried through, my teenage years, trying to be in bands and trying to write music in rock bands, and discovered the underground dance culture in the mid-90s. And I was so enamored by the fact that this music felt like something from the future, some new form of art that was, it was just incredibly influential for me. And, I found myself in studios at a pretty young age trying to learn how to produce, because the music sounded alien to me and I had no tangible idea of how that music was created, where it came from, where did these sounds come from. And, that led me down the path of learning about synthesizers and drum machines and how this music was put together. And yeah, I mean just the inspiration of being in a recording studio and working with musicians and even joining the forces of classical instruments with electronic music and everything else. I think from the moment I was a teenager, I knew I wanted to do this for the rest of my life. And there was nothing else in the world that I wanted to do. And I think I've spent the mass majority of my life pursuing this art and the ability to express myself musically through this form.
Okay. And David, same question. What was the first exposure you had to music, or the first memories you have involving music?
Pretty much since I was a kid, like even my mom and my dad would remind me that when I was like super young, I don't know, like 3 or 4 years old, I was always really attracted to music. The only difference with Moe is like I never wanted to pick up an instrument. Like I always just enjoyed listening to music and discovering different types of music at a young age. And like I had cousins in like the late 80s when I was about 5 or 6, going to like backyard parties at like family parties, and there would be DJs playing like hip hop and electro stuff, and like I've always been a big fan of that stuff. And not until like the early to mid 90s when I got into like dance music and house music and techno and stuff, and saw DJs and what it was, and that's when I got interested even more in the music. But I don't know, for some reason, picking up an instrument and learning how to play something was never something that I was like wanting to do. I saw a DJ, I was like, I want to DJ, I want to learn how to scratch, I want to do all that stuff. And like that was like how I started in the beginning.
Yeah.
I see. And you two did know each other before techno, right? Like when David, I suppose you would have been mostly DJing, and then Moe, you would have been kind of mostly doing stuff in the studio. But you guys did have like a relationship before Droid, before any of the techno stuff happened, right?
It was like right before or right at the beginning of Droid, because we have this mutual friend, Victor. He used to work at this record shop in LA called Higher Source, and this was like in like 2000, 2001. I used to go shopping there and buy techno, and he was friends with Moe. And he was like, hey, man, I got to hook you up with these guys that always come in here and buy techno records. They're like going to start a party crew and start throwing events. And that's when he linked me up with Moe. And that's how we kind of connected back then. But this was like, I think it was like 2001 maybe, or 2002.
Yeah.
I see.
It was around then. Yeah.
It was definitely 2000 or 2001. I would lean on 2000, but... whatever.
Yeah, something like so long ago.
I see.
Yeah, I mean, just for context, the record store that Victor worked at, it was called Higher Source, and it was a very, very kind of important culturally hub for DJs in Southern California. I mean, there was a couple of them. There was Dr. Free Clouds and Higher Source were kind of like the two primary record stores where everyone who was in underground dance culture, DJing culture would kind of go there. So it was definitely like a meeting point. I had met Vic earlier in the early 90s, and he used to kind of wash me off as this dumb kid who used to make a mess in the record bins. But he knew that we were kind of diehard techno fans, and LA has a huge rave culture. I mean, I think people underestimate how massive the rave scene was on the West Coast in the 90s. So even, before me and David had physically met over the years, when we discussed and we were like, oh, did you go to this party? You go to this party? We can we always were like, yeah, I saw that same DJ that same night play that same set. And like, we were probably feet away from each other and probably didn't even recognize it at the time, but we were at so many of the same parties. But the one thing that was very common across the rave scene in the 90s was that techno really wasn't a mainstay. Trance and drum and bass and hardcore and all these things were big, but techno was kind of on the fringe. And there were people like DJ Hyperactive and Adam X and Frankie Bones who permeated techno on the West Coast, but it still was on the fringe of things. So to meet people who were into techno was a rare thing, or at least into techno on the level that me and David were in. Yeah. So I think when our mutual friend saw David's dedication to the music, and he knew my dedication to the music and all the endeavors I was trying to pursue in terms of like starting a record label and trying to create this movement of creating a techno scene on the West Coast when it literally didn't exist. It was just instantly like, and, you know, we both kind of lived in the same region. I guess is Downey considered San Gabriel Valley?
Yeah. Or? No, it's still LA County, but
I mean, it's all LA County, but we're not far from each other. We're like borderline, very close neighborhoods. So like our mutual friend was like, "Hey, dude, I got this this dude David who comes into the record store all the time, and he makes techno, and he lives in Downey, and you know, you guys got to meet." And I was like, "Yeah, fuck it, let's do it." So he gave me his phone number. And I don't know about your recollection, David, but for me, I think we hit it off instantly. It was
for sure.
Very, very easy friendship to develop on. And I think when I met David, I went down to his studio and I was listening to what he was doing. And from what I remember personally, David didn't really have the what's the word I'm looking for? This like incredible desire to like push a career focused, you know, producer. No. It seemed more like this dude who was like making beats for fun, the way like a kid would be playing on a PlayStation just to play games. You know?
Yeah.
And I went to the studio and I heard what this dude was doing, and I was fucking floored. Excuse my language, but I was just like, "What the hell, dude?" And I'm like, "You got to release this shit," and he was just like, "Nobody cares." I was like, "No, dude, I'm starting a label. We got to do this. We got to make this happen." And it kind of like, it just went from there, you know?
So, I just think back then I never thought that you could even make a career, you know what I mean? Like just be releasing music. And I know it was a thing, but it just was so far out of my scope that I never tried, you know? Like I would just make tracks and just, no one would hear them besides some friends. That's about it, you know?
And so is that to say that, David, your first kind of, like where you fit into the whole droid thing was originally on the recording front? Like they originally saw that as the place where you most realistically fit in?
Yeah, exactly. In the beginning, yeah.
I see.
Because I wasn't really playing gigs back then. I was just like making mixtapes and stuff, so you know, it's not like they could see how I was as a DJ. But yeah, the first thing was with producing in the music.
I mean, I'll say flat out, you know, it's very rare when you meet a producer who's got this like extremely untapped talent, somebody who can just make music so effortlessly and so carelessly. There's a level of purity to it. And when I was starting the droid thing, my intention was to really create this kind of West Coast techno movement, some sort of grassroots movement. It was very unclear to me exactly at the time what direction it would take and where it would go. And do I even know enough artists to start a label to release music? Is there enough people in the city that can represent the sound and what it's going on? And meeting David was instantly like this fucking dude is really good. And he's got the talent and the potential to go all the way. And if there's any role that I could play in that, I'd be willing to. And obviously, his contributions to the record label and the music he's put in was pivotal in us really forming our sound and what we did.
I see. And I feel like it's important to note at this part that at that time you were going by audio injection, right, David?
Yeah. Actually, in the very beginning, even before I thought of audio injection, I was using David F.
Okay.
The very first Droid release that we put out was called -1, and it was a compilation of different artists. DJ Hyperactive was on it, Developer was on it, Ryan Jones, There was a very famous or popular DJ here who's part of the Moon Tribe crew that used to go by the name of Automat, and David did an incredible track on it, and it was called he went under the name David F.
I can't remember the name of the track.
I actually, you know, it's funny is that on that release we did a collaboration track on that too, a Drumcell and David F track, where we sampled that sample from.
It was the remix, Odyssey, wasn't it?
2001.
Yeah, it was from Space Odyssey. That's right. Yeah.
So yeah, it was a very, very early on collaboration.
I see. Yeah. And obviously, you two would go on to collaborate quite a bit. Notably, your 2009 EP, Cell Injection EP. How did, and that's obviously where Cell Injection gets its name. Before you guys were even going, is that it was not a portmanteau, but a combination of both of your names. It was Drumcell and Audio Injection, so Cell Injection. How did that EP come together? Was that your guy? No, that wasn't your first time collaborating on a track, but was that your first collaborative EP?
It was because before that we were just doing remixes before that.
Yeah, I can't remember in the top of my head the timeline of what came first and what didn't. I do know that that's where the name kind of stuck. I remember at the time I went out to your house in Downey and we were working on tracks in the studio. And we put together a 3-track EP or a 2-track EP or something.
2 with remixes. 2 tracks with remixes.
And we didn't know what to call it. And it just it came off the whim. There was no deep thought, no long, making a list of names of what possibly. It was just Cell Injection. We'll just call it the Cell Injection EP. It was Drumcell and Audio Injection, Cell Injection EP. I think Tim Xavier did a remix, Tony Rohr, and...
That's right.
I can't remember.
No, that wasn't that one.
No.
That was I know, no, it was so long ago. No, the first EP we did together, we didn't call it Cell Injection yet. We were just Drumcell and Audio Injection, and that was the Communicate one.
That's right. I stand corrected.
Yeah, the Cell Injection EP is one we'd got David Flores to do a remix, and that's right. I forgot who else. Yeah. That's the one that was 2009.
Yeah, as a matter of fact, now that you say that, it's bringing it back. When we did was that Bottle Opener was on the Communicate EP.
Yeah. That's the one that put us on the map.
Yeah, we got super lucky. It was right when Beatport was just launching, and it was super early on, and we did a track called Bottle Opener, and Speedy J had picked it up, and
Chris
Liebing. It was interesting because it was overnight we saw all of our heroes playing our music and we were like, what the hell? And at that time, when you sold a lot of music on Beatport, the numbers were tremendously higher than they are these days. So it brought an instant overnight amount of attention to the collaborative EP that we had done together.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah.
And then we started getting remix requests and stuff like that.
Yeah, that's right. Sorry, I totally screwed that up.
Would you say that first EP, that first collaborative EP, or the Cell Injection EP was the one where you kind of had the eureka moment that you realized you had some, really interesting creative chemistry between the differences in your approaches?
Definitely the first one. That was the Drumcell and Audio Injection EP. Yeah.
Yeah, that Bottle Opener track, even till today, sometimes gets dropped here and there, and that definitely opened up a lot of doors, and it kind of we ended up doing some remixes for Joel Moole.
Chris Liebing.
For his, what was that EP called?
Just Auf und Ab.
Yeah, Auf und Ab or something like that, which is some German name.
Remix Dustin Zahn.
Yeah. So it was interesting because after that first record, a lot of remix opportunities opened up from people that, we've always kind of never even dreamed would be possible to collaborate and work with, which then led up to the Cell Injection EP.
I see.
Yeah.
Okay. And when was your first official performance as Cell Injection? Because I know it was just the name of the EP before it was the name of your project. But when did you appear on a bill as Cell Injection first?
Damn, it was one of the interface parties. I want to say, was it the one with Tim Xavier and Luis Flores? Do you remember that one? Where it was actually as cell injection?
Yeah, it's possible. I think one of my partners at the time when we were doing Droid, and we had started doing these kind of infamous warehouse parties that were labeled under the name Interface. The party started to pick up quite a bit of steam, and that's kind of really when the LA techno scene really started to grab some roots and a pretty strong foundation. And we decided that David and I should for once play together as opposed to just writing music together. And I don't even remember exactly who came up with the idea to put it on the flyer as cell injection instead of Drumcell versus audio injection.
I can't remember either, man.
And I wish I had some sort of like memory of that, but it just, like I said, all of this stuff, which is it's a credit and a tribute to in its own, that like it's never been forced or some kind of like contrived idea to do things. It's always been just this natural progression of like, it happened, and then like, oh cool, it's working. Oh, this happened. Oh cool, let's continue to do it. Yeah, that works. Which is at the same time, it's also a pretty familiar parallel to our friendship as well. It's always pretty easygoing and just like, yeah, let's do it. Fuck it.
Yeah.
And how is a cell injection set different from how you each might play individually? Like, is it just you meeting in the middle, or is it more like it's like a whole greater than the sum of its parts?
Yeah, I think it's us meeting in the middle because with our own individual elements and stuff. Because like I tend to play a bit more jack-in, funky, and Moe likes to play a little bit heavier and darker. So like when we do a cell injection set, we both kind of like, yeah, definitely meet in the middle. Like I won't get too funky and too jack-in. He won't go super dark and heady. Unless sometimes he'll just be like, hey, I want to play this. Then I'm like, dude, go for it, But definitely meeting in the middle somewhere.
And even if we do lean more into our personal styles, I think it also adds to the dynamics of the set because it's not like a purity of one particular set. It kind of adds to this whole flow of where things can be driving and aggressive or super weird and hypnotic to funky and dancing and upbeat and jacking, So it's like it kind of adds to this very kind of storytelling vibe to it.
Right. Your styles aren't so different from one another that it would be too hard of a break from what the other person is playing at any time, really.
No,
yeah, I think we've also been able to naturally grow this ability to be able to play together and kind of know each other's styles well enough where you can kind of already tell where the other person's going before they even go there.
Yeah.
So there's no like hard tug and pull, and it's all about giving each person their own time and space to take things in the direction that they feel they need to take them in, and then mixing in other loops and other stuff on top of what he's doing while he's playing, but not overdoing it to take away from what he's doing, but just to play a supportive role. And then kind of hand the baton off to me when it's my time to do my thing, and then he plays his supportive role behind it, and it creates a pretty natural flow. And there's never any real big surprises because I think there's good chemistry in terms of being able to read each other well.
That makes sense. Yeah. And walk me through some highlights of specifically the cell injection discography since that first EP.
Well,
I think we name dropped
one of the. Yeah, there was like I think one of the more successful remixes we did after the first EP was like the one for Dustin's On, which was like 2008 or 9 or something like that.
Yeah.
And then for Chris Liebing on CLR, that kind of gave us a big break as well.
Yeah.
And
we did one for, on Ibadan Records as well.
Oh, for Jerome Sydenham.
Yeah.
Who else did we do? God, so long ago, man.
Yeah.
Um,
There's been
days.
quite a few highlights, and I mean, even though maybe it's hard for us to cherry pick a couple of them, and maybe I should have overlooked our discography before we got onto this conversation, but I would say that all the collaborative records that we've done together have been incredibly well received, and people seem to really enjoy them, and they tend to be a highlight.
I see. Okay. And then how would you say that specifically Cell Injection's style has changed over the years? And this could be on the recording front or on the performance front. When you look back at, a set you guys had played 10 years ago, and then you look back at a set you played sometime this year or last year, what would you think? What are some observable differences?
I'll jump in on this one real quick, because I think one of the very first really big gigs that we ended up getting as Cell Injection was we got invited to play at Berghain. What year was that, David? 2010?
2010.
Yeah, I always get it mixed up, 2009 or 2010. And usually they give each artist about 4 hours to play at Berghain. But since it was the two of us, we got an 8-hour set, I believe.
Oh wow!
And 7 or 8.
Yeah, 7 or 8 hour set, and we played opening too. And I went back and I've listened to the recordings of that, and of course, because our music selection was naturally a little bit deeper in the beginning because it was an opening set, that room packed up fast. It wasn't like we played to an empty room for most of the night because it was an opening set. It was packed to the brim and full. And our styles were significantly much different than they are now. But I don't know if that has anything to do with us individually, and more so how much the sound of techno has evolved over the years.
Sure.
And the way we kind of perceived them. But even though I think technically we were never allowed to publish those mixes publicly, I think this is even before that rule kind of came into place. We had posted that long set on SoundCloud, and I had some crazy amount of hundreds of thousands of downloads or views. And I've always attributed to the fact that sometimes I would even say that the majority of gigs that I had received in Europe at that time came more from that DJ set recording than from any record I think I had ever put out at the time.
Yeah.
Wow.
Did we use some of it for this CLR podcast? I can't remember.
Yeah, we might have taken a 1 hour edit excerpt of it that was on the CLR podcast, which for some of the younger folks that don't know, at the time, the CLR podcast was easily probably one of the most listened to and biggest podcasts globally around the world. Nice. So it reached a lot of people.
And people would get gigs based off of doing a CLR podcast back in the day.
Yeah, it probably did more for your career to do a CLR podcast than it would be to release a record, unfortunately. But and then over the years, I think as Dave and I have both kind of grown and as individuals, as artists, I think, it's noticeable that our individual styles have changed. David is definitely, with the change into doing more Truncate stuff, has kind of pioneered a sound that defines him, and many people have also, in my opinion, have copied what he's done, and he's kind of created his own kind of lane for it. And my sound as well has gone into its own depths, and within my own side projects with Belief Defect and Hypoxia, and I've gone more of a cerebral route with my music and all that stuff. But still, when we play together, we find common ground, and it still works really well.
I see. And the other big thing that you guys are working on that isn't a Cell Injection thing, but it is a Dave and Moe thing, is the Observe parties. What was the inspiration that led to the Observe parties?
You want me to take this one,
Moe,
too?
Me? Moe, you're better at articulating this.
Well, Well, in a lot of ways, it would be a lie to not say that Observe is kind of a natural continuation to what we had started with Droid in the early days. But at the same time, we wanted to kind of reinvent our vision and our approach towards things, and with a new circle of collaborators that all have their own input and their own ideas. So, we started Observe as a way to continue to do events in LA and around, the US or the world or whatever you want to say. And since David didn't play such a massive role in the promoter chair when we were doing Droid, he was more of a contributor to the label. I really wanted to bring him into the seat with us all to kind of have his input and his say in how we curate the events, because I think he has an incredibly positive and unique perspective towards curating lineups and how we put together events. So we had our own vision and our own kind of plan, and, rightfully so, just to label it, Observe primarily is me, David, and Greg, who is Octaform, who's kind of the visual elements of the event. And I think we're super happy with the direction that it's taken. I think our production has gotten tighter, our lineups have gotten better, our entire ethos and our kind of cultural look at how events should be curated kind of really is represented well through the brand. Because unlike most other promoters who just want to book the next biggest DJ and throw a party and, make money and then go on, and it's just kind of like a flash flight income, we kind of perceive the whole concept of throwing events and doing parties as an art form in its own, so it's a lot more, it's more deep for us. We don't want to just throw parties for the sake of throwing parties. We want to make an art form out of the ability to promote and put something together that's special enough that people kind of walk away from and remembering for a long period of time.
Definitely.
Yeah, and like with most thing, and on top of that, it's we try to have every party be unique in some sort of way, not just putting a warehouse and putting some lights and something in it, something special, something that people remember, but also we want to get to the level where we could book anybody and people will come regardless of the names, that's really important to us, because we want people to come for the experience rather than just coming because of who was booked at the parties.
Yeah, definitely. And I know that you've had Observe events in Los Angeles, Detroit. I went to one in Denver. Are there other cities than those three where Observe has touched down?
We did Miami.
Okay.
We did Miami years back. Chicago.
Yeah.
A couple times in Chicago, and you said Detroit, right? Yeah. Did we do? No, we didn't do New York.
No, we haven't done New York, but we do have Mexico City on deck for an upcoming Observe event. And we, I don't know if we should say too early, but there's been some talks of even maybe taking the brand over to China to do a small tour. It's kind of been on the table. And we do receive a lot of requests from different places of people like, hey, we would love to bring Observe here. We would love to bring Observe here. And, if we're working with the right collaborators that could meet us on our vision and without having to compromise our, artistic integrity and our view on the way how we want to do it, then we're always up for expanding and moving into new directions.
Yeah, definitely.
And you've each made commentary somewhat recently about the lifespan of the average techno track. David, you just tweeted about it. Well, no, it wasn't just you, because Moe and I had a conversation, and he echoed a lot of the same things.
Yeah.
Oh, funny. I literally just tweeted that yesterday.
Yeah.
Yeah, he did.
Does this reality change anything about how you produce music, how you play music, even how you move in the industry?
Well, for me, I think it kind of does, but I'm trying to get away from that. Lately, I've just been trying to get back to how I used to make music 10 years ago, just like making tracks and just not caring about if it's going to be well received or not. I got too caught up on like, oh, is this going to do well? Is it going to work well? Blah, blah, blah. And just like, I got to get out of that mentality, and get back to just making tracks. And hey, if it lasts more than a week, great. If it doesn't, then, just move on. Just got to keep going.
So that characteristic of yours as a producer that Moe commented on a while ago, you feel like you maybe deviated away from that for a little bit?
Oh yeah, 100%. Once I started getting more successful, I started worrying about if my track's gonna do well, or you know what I mean, and just like I need to get away from that, and I have more so lately, definitely have, but also just finding the inspiration to make tracks has been a bit harder these days as well.
I think that's a natural progression for an artist, period. I mean, I think that's something that everybody has to go through. I don't care who out there is such a purist techno person that they don't give a shit about what anyone thinks about their art. I call bullshit on it. I think on some sort of subconscious level that turns to permeate you on some way. And I think for any long career based musician, artist, that's not even exactly related to DJing, but in any art form, I think part of the steps of growing over a long period of time of an artist is to go through that process where the thought of external validation starts to wear at you. And I think when you push through that and you overcome it on the other side and you start to reevaluate what that means, and you start to go back to doing it purely for yourself, is part of the growth process. And I think that everyone needs to go through it at some point. And I think that's when you really hit your stride. That's when you're like, fuck it. I've got the experience. I've got the years behind me. I've been through the shit. I've felt overly critical about myself. Now I'm at a point in my life where I don't fucking care anymore, or I'll try to pretend harder that I don't care anymore. and you start to, you start to really kind of mature into a bigger and better place.
Yeah.
So.
And over the past decade or so that you each have maybe gone through a similar metamorphosis in that way, there's been a whole new generation of fans that have entered the scene after, maybe some of them after outgrowing EDM and starting to explore, deeper things, more underground things, stuff like that. Have you noticed any differences in this wave of fans that maybe has just discovered your music or discovered techno in general?
Yeah, 100%.
Oh, absolutely. Maybe we're creatures of habit, or maybe we're old school from what people like to label it. Just to go back to your earlier question about how the short shelf life, the industry will always find ways to adapt to what's easier and what's better for marketability. How do we turn DJs and artists into cookies and ice cream to sell on a shelf? What works better? But I think time after time, I think the world has always kind of proved to us that no matter how these kind of like really overwhelming capitalist agendas seem to permeate into our scene, artists who kind of stick to their form and what they do and make it about the art before they make it anything seem to have the most longevity and more profound careers for the long run. So yeah, sometimes there is that pressure of like, oh, does music even matter anymore because it only has this 1 week shelf life? Why are people getting booked? Is it because they did a great album? Is it because they are incredible DJs, or is it because they just have overly successful social media standards? I mean, I don't know. But I think we're artists through and through, and that really kind of brings us back to sticking to our guns and navigating sticking to your guns and sticking to your artistic integrity in this new world where everything is about instant gratification and social media attention and online hype about things. It's tricky, man. It's tricky to find where you fit. And it's tricky to even sometimes question yourself, am I willing to deal with all this bullshit that's required to continue to do what I love? Or is it better to just stand in the background and do what I love without having all the successful accolades that come along with it. I think there's a lot of people out there that have found a fine balance to be able to kind of do both. And I think there's a lot of really talented producers who kind of sit in the background and still trying to figure out how to navigate the world that we live in today.
Absolutely. Well, that's everything I've got. I learned a lot for sure. Is there anything else, any other urgent things people should understand about cell injection that I haven't asked you about?
Nothing's really urgent.
It's nothing urgent. Like Mo was saying, we just kind of do everything. We go with the flow, and and everything just comes naturally, you know?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's how it should be. Well, thank you so much for your time, guys. It's been an absolute pleasure for me. And thank you to the viewers. I learned something. I hope you learned something as well. And we'll see you next time, guys.
Thanks a lot.
Yeah,
sorry for talking
Thanks
so
for
much.
having us. It's good. It took the words out of my mouth.
Cheers, man.
Peace.